The impossible blood patient, the man who bled black and had 400-year-old cells. What you are about to hear fundamentally challenged everything humanity thought it knew about life, death, and the very boundaries of biological existence. It was a medical case so unprecedented, so utterly impossible, that details of it were quickly classified, scrubbed from official databases, and whispered about only in the darkest corners of specialized forums. This is the story of the patient who bled black, whose cells defied death, and whose arrival forced a re-evaluation of reality itself. A story of a medical anomaly that spread far beyond the confines of a single hospital, revealing a hidden truth that many powers desperately wish to keep buried. Was it a miracle of science, a new form of life, or something far older, far more unsettling, finally emerging from the shadows? September 23, 2025. The historic city of Prague, Czech Republic, nestled in the heart of Europe, slumbered beneath a crescent moon. Its cobbled streets and ancient spires held centuries of secrets, but none perhaps as profound as the one about to unfold within the sterile walls of its modern medical institutions. At precisely 2:14 a.m., the emergency room of the University Hospital Prague, a bustling hub of medical expertise, received a routine call: a traffic accident on the famed Charles Bridge, a minor collision. Paramedics brought in a male patient, estimated to be in his early 30s, identified only as Dante Sokolov. He had sustained a deep, gushing laceration to his left forearm, a common injury that typically involved swift triage, suturing, and discharge. On duty that night was Dr. Elena Novakova, a 34-year-old hematologist with a decade of exemplary experience. Dr. Novakova was known for her meticulous attention to detail, her unwavering professionalism, and a healthy skepticism honed by years of encountering every conceivable medical oddity. Nothing, however, could have prepared her for what she was about to witness. As the nurse carefully removed the hastily applied pressure dressing, a collective gasp rippled through the emergency bay. The blood, which should have been a vibrant crimson, pulsing with life, was instead an opaque, viscous black. Not a dark red, not a clotted, oxidized brown, but a profound, almost inky, black. It moved sluggishly, like thick motor oil, defying the known properties of human blood. Dr. Novakova, momentarily stunned, instinctively reached for her penlight, shining it onto the patient's wound. The edges of the laceration, deep and ragged, revealed no trace of redness beneath the strange discharge. She looked up, her gaze meeting the patient's. Dante Sokolov, despite the gruesome injury and the bizarre nature of his bodily fluid, lay remarkably calm. His eyes, an unusual shade of deep amber, seemed to hold an unsettling tranquility, observing the rising panic around him with detached amusement. "Doctor," he murmured, his voice a low, melodic baritone that somehow cut through the growing tension. "I fear you will find this unconventional." Initial vital signs were taken, and the results sent a chill down the spines of the medical team. The patient's body temperature registered a shocking 12 degrees Celsius. For context, the human body begins to shut down irrevocably below 28 degrees Celsius. Permanent brain damage and cardiac arrest typically occur. Yet, Dante Sokolov was fully conscious, lucid, and conversing with remarkable composure. His oxygen saturation, typically a critical indicator, hovered at an impossible 67%, a level that should have rendered him comatose or worse. His heart rate, a languid 34 beats per minute, defied all clinical expectations for a trauma patient. Every single metric screamed death, yet the patient was undeniably alive. A more experienced nurse, her hands trembling slightly, attempted to administer an IV, but the vein collapsed upon needle insertion, oozing only more of the strange black substance. Standard coagulation tests were immediately ordered, and a frantic call was placed to the on-call laboratory technician. The atmosphere in the emergency room shifted from professional calm to a mixture of fear and profound bewilderment. Seasoned medical professionals, accustomed to life and death scenarios, found themselves utterly without explanation. As Dr. Novakova moved to clean the wound more thoroughly, a new, even more disturbing phenomenon began to manifest. Before her very eyes, the deep laceration on Dante Sokolov's arm started to change. The ragged edges, still oozing the dark fluid, began to subtly pull together, almost imperceptibly at first. Within minutes, the flow of black fluid diminished, then stopped entirely. The exposed tissue, which should have been inflamed and painful, seemed to reorganize itself. It was as if a fast-forward button had been pressed on the natural healing process. The wound was not just clotting, it was actively repairing itself, knitting skin and muscle with impossible speed. Dr. Novakova had never, in all her years of practice, witnessed anything remotely similar. It was a biological impossibility, playing out in real time. The laboratory technician arrived, her face a mask of weary confusion, summoned by the urgent, almost desperate tone of Dr. Novakova's call. She was presented with a small vial of the black blood, carefully drawn before the wound sealed itself. Even in the sterile confines of the sample tube, the substance appeared alien, dense, and utterly unlike anything found in conventional human physiology. The technician, her brow furrowed in disbelief, carried the sample back to the lab, unknowingly carrying the first undeniable proof that something beyond the grasp of modern science had just walked into their hospital. The hospital's biochemistry and hematology labs, typically humming with the quiet efficiency of cutting-edge technology, erupted into a flurry of frantic activity. The sample of Dante Sokolov's blood quickly became the epicenter of an unprecedented scientific enigma. Initial automated analyzers, designed for human blood, churned out error messages, unable to categorize the bizarre fluid. Manual analysis under the microscope, however, yielded results that were even more confounding. The blood cells, observed under the highest magnification, possessed a peculiar morphology. They lacked the refined standardized structures common to modern human erythrocytes. Instead, they displayed characteristics strikingly similar to those described in medieval anatomical texts. Cells depicted before the advent of sophisticated microscopy, before the detailed understanding of cellular biology. It was as if these cells had somehow frozen in time, retaining a primitive form from centuries past. Even more startling was the complete absence of apoptosis, the programmed cellular death that is a fundamental, non-negotiable process in all living organisms. Human cells have a finite lifespan, a genetic timer that dictates their eventual demise. Yet these black cells, observed for 6, then 12, then 24 hours outside the body, showed no signs of degradation. They maintained their structural integrity, their peculiar internal dynamics, utterly indifferent to the passage of time or the absence of a host organism. They were, to all intents and purposes, immortal. The lab technicians, their initial confusion giving way to a mixture of awe and terror, subjected the sample to every known method of cellular destruction. They applied hypotonic solutions, designed to make cells burst by altering osmotic pressure. The cells resisted. They attempted thermal shock, exposing them to extreme temperatures. The cells remained intact. They even used high-intensity UV radiation, a potent destroyer of cellular DNA. The cells continued to thrive, showing an unprecedented resilience to any attempt at biological annihilation. It was a horrifying spectacle, watching life refuse to die. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from the carbon-14 dating. In rare and extraordinary circumstances, when standard biological dating is insufficient, specialized units can perform carbon-14 analysis on organic samples. Reluctantly, a blood sample was dispatched to the university's archaeobiological department. The results, delivered 16 hours later via encrypted message, sent shockwaves through the medical community involved in the case. The estimated date of origin for the biological material was 1620 to 1640 CE, with a margin of error of plus or minus 15 years. Dante Sokolov's blood, The very life force coursing through his veins was 400 years old. This revelation defied not only medical science but the very concept of organic longevity. How could blood, a constantly regenerating tissue, retain such an ancient signature? How could its constituent cells persist for centuries? Then came the genetic analysis. DNA sequencing revealed a complex and baffling tapestry of genetic markers. Among the familiar modern human sequences, the lab detected distinct traces belonging to 3 haplogroups previously thought to be extinct. These were ancient European lineages, populations that had vanished or been absorbed during cataclysmic historical events like the Crusades, the Black Death, and the brutal 30 Years' War. It was as if Sokolov's DNA was a living historical document, a mosaic of genetic information spanning hundreds of years and forgotten peoples. A senior geneticist, consulted on the matter, reportedly sent a hastily typed email to Dr. Novakova, a fragment of which later surfaced from a server anomaly. The email, riddled with exclamation marks and question marks, reportedly read, "I cannot interpret these results. It is an impossibility. He is a genetic mosaic across multiple epochs, centuries. This should not be biologically possible. Unless, no, I cannot bring myself to write it down." The scientific community was not just baffled, it was terrified. The very foundations of their knowledge were crumbling. Meanwhile, back in the emergency room, the impossible healing of Dante Sokolov's wound had reached its astonishing conclusion. The nurse who had initially assisted Dr. Novakova provided a chilling testimony weeks later. According to her, the laceration, initially a gruesome open wound, had progressively closed and reknitted itself. Within 30 minutes of Dr. Novakova's first observation, the wound had completely sealed. In less than an hour, the area where the deep cut had been was pristine, unblemished skin. It was as if the injury had never occurred, leaving behind not even a faint scar. It was like watching a film in fast forward, the nurse recounted, her voice still laced with disbelief and a tremor of fear. The skin just sewed itself together. I kept expecting a scar, a mark, but there was nothing. It was utterly flawless. The implications were staggering. Dante Sokolov was not merely a patient with unusual blood. He was a living, breathing defiance of every biological law known to humanity. His very existence was an ongoing, unfolding miracle, or a terrifying harbinger of something far beyond comprehension. The next step, a private conversation between Dr. Novakova and the enigmatic patient, would peel back another layer of this impossible reality, hinting at a truth far stranger than any scientific anomaly. The decision to speak with Dante Sokolov alone was Dr. Elena Novakova's, born out of a desperate need for answers that no lab result or medical textbook could provide. At 4:38 a.m., in a small, sterile consultation room, she sat across from the patient. The room felt charged, heavy with unspoken questions. Unbeknownst to her, a digital audio recorder, routinely left on a nearby counter for transcribing sensitive conversations, subtly captured fragments of their exchange, later retrieved by an anonymous source before its swift and thorough deletion from all hospital systems. Sokolov, his demeanor unchanged, remained unnervingly calm. His gaze, steady and ancient, seemed to penetrate her very being. "Dr. Novakova," he began, his voice a quiet counterpoint to her racing thoughts, "you are frightened. It is understandable. Who are you?" Dr. Novakova managed, her voice barely a whisper, her scientific objectivity shattered. "My name is of little consequence," he replied smoothly. "I have worn many. Dante serves for today." "Your tests, they make no sense," she pressed, clutching the impossible lab reports. "But this is impossible." Sokolov offered a faint, almost pitying smile. "Impossible within what modern medicine comprehends. But Dr. Sam, modern medicine, in its current form, has existed for merely 300 years. I, and what I represent, have existed for much, much longer." A cold dread coiled in Dr. Novakova's stomach. What do you mean by existed for much longer? He paused, a silence that stretched, pregnant with meaning. Then, his voice dropped, carrying the weight of centuries. Have you ever heard of the Prague Plague, the great pestilence of 1634? Dr. Novakova nodded, a faint memory stirring from her history lessons. Yes, it devastated the city, killed thousands, more than 15,000 people. I was there, Sokolov affirmed, his gaze distant, as if seeing through walls and time. Karlova Street, number 14. It was a brutal winter. The snow was heavy, stained with the refuse of the dying. Bodies, doctor, piled high in the squares, left where they fell. He described the scene with chilling, vivid detail, a first-hand account so precise it was terrifying. And I remember a young healer. She wore crude leather gloves, her face covered with a cloth soaked in vinegar, trying to save the children. She had a distinctive mark, a crescent-shaped scar on her left wrist. Dr. Novakova gasped, pushing her chair back abruptly, a sudden, sharp pain lancing through her left arm. How do you know that? She demanded, her voice trembling, her scientific mind reeling. Because I watched her die, doctor, Sokolov continued, his voice devoid of emotion, yet profoundly impactful. Fever took her. Delirium. The black buboes blossomed on her neck. She fought for 3 agonizing days. In the end, she cried out a name, barely a whisper. Tomasz. The name resonated with a profound, almost primal familiarity within Dr. Novakova. Tomasz, she stammered, was the name of my great-grandfather. It's in my family records. Sokolov's amber eyes fixed on hers, piercing the veil of generations. He was not your great-grandfather, doctor. He was your lover, in that life. A sickening lurch of disbelief, followed by a wave of inexplicable recognition, swept over Dr. Novakova. She instinctively glanced at her left wrist, then back at Sokolov. The crescent-shaped scar, a faint, pale mark she'd carried since childhood, pulsed faintly under her skin. Her mother had always dismissed it as a birthmark, an unmemorable childhood accident. She had never questioned its origin. You've lived this life before, Elena Novakova, Sokolov revealed, his voice now imbued with a strange, ancient intimacy. And you died, and returned, and lived, and died again, 7 times, always in Prague, always a healer, always dying young, always bearing that crescent scar. He paused, then delivered the final, shattering command. Lift your left sleeve, doctor. With trembling hands, she obeyed, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes fell upon the distinctive mark. A birthmark, a childhood accident, an anomaly. All the explanation she had accepted throughout her life now crumbled into dust. I've had this scar since I was a child, she whispered, her voice laced with dawning horror and an even more terrifying sense of recognition. My mother said it was an accident, but I never truly knew. It was no accident, Sokolov affirmed. It is a mark that crosses centuries. You are one of the chosen. Chosen for what? She breathed, her scientific mind battling desperately against the encroaching tide of the impossible. Sokolov leaned forward slightly, his ancient eyes locking onto hers. To awaken. The last word hung in the air, a profound and terrifying pronouncement. The digital audio recorder, its memory slowly filling, captured the sound of Dr. Novakova's ragged breath, the creak of her chair, and then, inexplicably, a sudden burst of static, cutting the conversation short. What followed, as captured by the hospital's security cameras, would soon send shockwaves far beyond the walls of the consultation room. The digital audio recorder's abrupt cessation left a vacuum of information, a chilling silence that amplified the unsettling nature of the prior conversation. However, the hospital's extensive network of security cameras, diligently recording every movement, inadvertently became the next crucial piece of evidence in the unfolding enigma. At 4:52 a.m., Dr. Elena Novakova emerged from the consultation room, no longer alone. Dante Sokolov walked beside her, his calm demeanor mirrored by a newfound, eerie tranquility in the doctor. They moved through the deserted hospital corridors with an unhurried, almost deliberate pace, a stark contrast to the earlier panic and urgency. It was a departure so quiet, so devoid of alarm, that it almost blended into the background hum of the sleeping medical facility. The cameras tracked them as they reached a rarely used side exit, typically reserved for staff and deliveries. At 5:07 a.m., they passed through the door, stepping out into the pre-dawn chill of the parking lot. The final image captured by the exterior surveillance, just moments before the full extent of the impossible would manifest, showed Dr. Novakova pause. She turned, her head tilted slightly, her gaze directly at the camera lens. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raised her hand and waved. It was a gesture of farewell, an acknowledgement, or perhaps a defiant recognition that she was being watched, that her decision had been made. At 5:11 a.m., an unprecedented event occurred. All 12 security cameras covering the parking lot, along with the adjacent service roads and pedestrian exits, simultaneously experienced a catastrophic failure. Not a general power outage, but a precise, synchronized disruption across multiple independent circuits. For exactly 9 minutes and 34 seconds, the entire area was plunged into a technological void, a blind spot in the hospital's otherwise impenetrable surveillance network. When the systems rebooted, stuttered back to life, and began recording again, the parking lot was utterly, inexplicably empty. No vehicles had exited, no barrier sensors had been triggered, no shadowy figures had darted into the night. Dr. Elena Novakova and Dante Sokolov had simply vanished, as if they had dissolved into the very air. The alarm was not raised until 11:20 a.m., when Dr. Novakova failed to report for her next scheduled shift. Attempts to contact her by phone went unanswered, her mobile number disconnected. A standard wellness check by concerned colleagues escalated rapidly into a police inquiry. Officers were dispatched to her apartment, just a few blocks from the hospital. The front door was found unlocked. Inside, the apartment presented an unsettling picture of pristine order. The bed was made with military precision, cushions perfectly fluffed. There were no personal effects, no family photographs, no decorative trinkets, no half-finished books, no clothes in the wardrobe. The closets were empty, her drawers bare, as if the apartment had been uninhabited for years, meticulously prepared for a showing. Yet, her neighbors swore they had seen her coming and going daily, a vibrant and consistent presence. The digital investigation that followed was as thorough as it was baffling. Dr. Novakova's entire online presence seemed to have been systematically erased. Her social media profiles, once active, were deleted. Her bank account, usually maintained with a healthy balance, had been closed exactly 72 hours prior to her disappearance. Its funds transferred to an untraceable offshore account. Most disturbingly, her hospital records, all 12 years of her exemplary work history, including every patient file, every commendation, every shift report, had been scrubbed clean from the central system. It was as if Dr. Elena Novakova had been meticulously, precisely, and utterly erased from existence. 3 days later, a subtle anomaly emerged. A junior nurse, cleaning the break room, discovered a small, leather-bound diary tucked away inside an old hematology textbook that Dr. Novakova had left behind. It was her personal journal, meticulously written in her distinctive hand. The final entry, dated September 22nd, a mere 24 hours before the incident, painted a chilling picture of premonition and dawning realization. In the entry, Dr. Novakova wrote of recurring dreams dreams of a man with ancient eyes, who spoke of destiny and choice. She detailed his claim that he would come tomorrow, and the profound, unsettling certainty she felt that finally it's time. She wrote about an inexplicable conviction, a sense of having awaited this moment for centuries, a feeling that defied all logic. Most poignantly, she described a physical sensation. Her crescent-shaped scar, a mark she'd always dismissed, was burning for the very first time. Her final words in the journal, penned just hours before her life changed forever, were a stark prophecy. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, I finally remember. The diary was immediately confiscated by authorities. The nurse, utterly terrified, was forced to sign a confidentiality agreement under threat of legal action. However, before relinquishing the journal, she had managed to surreptitiously photograph its final, pivotal pages. These images circulated briefly, a frantic testament to the truth, for approximately 11 hours across encrypted medical chat groups and anonymous social media platforms, before they too were systematically and irrevocably removed from the internet. The cover-up, meticulously executed, was underway, but the seeds of an impossible truth had already been sown. The diary fragments, those precious few hours they existed online, sparked an underground investigation among independent historians and amateur sleuths. Driven by a blend of academic curiosity and a growing sense of conspiracy, they began to painstakingly sift through centuries of records, particularly those concerning Prague. Their initial skepticism soon gave way to profound disbelief. In the dusty, meticulously preserved municipal archives of Prague, a chilling discovery was made. Amidst brittle parchment and faded ink, a death record was unearthed, dated January 17, 1634. The name recorded was Elena Novakova, a woman aged 29. Her profession was listed simply as healer. The cause of death, undeniably, was the bubonic plague, the devastating Black Death that swept through Europe. Her address, Karlova Street, 14. Initially, it was dismissed as a remarkable coincidence. Novakova is a common surname in the Czech Republic, and the plague claimed countless lives. However, the trail did not end there. A 1635 medical chronicle, penned by a diligent monk who documented the horrors of the plague in exquisite detail, contained a crude but unmistakable illustration. It depicted a young woman, her face serene even in the grim context, her hair tied back, and one prominently drawn on her left wrist was a distinctive crescent-shaped scar. The accompanying text, translated from Old Czech, was profoundly evocative. The healer of souls, she who carried the moon's mark, departed this world in the black winter. They say a stranger dressed in black stood at her side in the final hour. They say she smiled before closing her eyes. They say her last words were, "Finally, I remember." The parallels with Dr. Elena's diary entry, written almost 400 years later, were impossible to ignore. This singular, unsettling connection spurred a deeper, more systematic search. Over the following months, independent researchers, often working anonymously and sharing findings on encrypted servers, uncovered an astonishing pattern. Across medieval records, stretching back through the centuries, they found 6 additional instances of a woman named Elena, or a closely phonetic variant, always associated with Prague. 1542, Elena Novakova, a midwife, perished during a smallpox outbreak. 1467, Elena Danova, an herbalist, disappeared during a devastating city fire. 1389, Elena de Bohemia, a healer, was tragically executed for witchcraft amidst rising religious paranoia. 1298, Elena Novakova, another healer, died under mysterious circumstances, her body found unblemished but lifeless. The pattern continued, tracing back through the intricate tapestry of Prague's history. 7 documented occasions, spanning nearly 700 years, all of them in Prague, all practicing professions of healing or caregiving, all died young, their lives cut short by disease, tragedy, or persecution. And every single archived record, whether a death certificate, a town registry, or a legal document, mentioned the same unmistakable identifier, a lunar scar on the left wrist. The evidence was overwhelming. It was not a coincidence. It was as if the same soul, the same individual essence, had been reincarnating or, more accurately, returning to the same city, assuming a similar purpose, and enduring a similar fate for 7 consecutive lifetimes. Each time, her story ended in tragedy, her life abruptly curtailed, until 2025. This time, the cycle was broken. This time, as her diary so poignantly stated, she didn't die. This time, she awakened. Deeper historical and anthropological research unveiled even more unsettling layers. Across Slavic and Eastern European folklore, recurring legends speak of the marked ones. These were individuals, often women, born with distinctive physical identifiers, birthmark scars, moon-shaped discolorations, or heterochromatic eyes. These weren't merely physical quirks. They were believed to be signs of a profound destiny, markers that designated them as chosen by entities far older than humanity. These legends describe not a brutal hunt, but a patient, centuries-long observation. Immortal beings, known by various names such as Strigoi in Romanian folklore, Moroi in Serbian, or Upir in Polish and Czech traditions, were not depicted as indiscriminate predators. Instead, they were said to observe specific human souls, tracking their reincarnations, watching them live and die, life after life. The purpose was not consumption, but companionship. These immortals sought not victims, but intellectual equals, emotional anchors, partners for an eternity that stretched beyond mortal comprehension. The myth suggests that the chosen souls had to prove themselves through their brief human lives, demonstrating qualities of compassion, profound healing abilities, deep knowledge, or unwavering integrity. It was a test of character across multiple existences. On the 7th, or sometimes 8th, return, if the soul showed readiness, the immortal would reveal themselves. This was the invitation. It was never forced, always offered. Those who accepted underwent a profound transformation, a dark communion, often symbolized by a blood exchange, leading to a new form of existence, free from the endless wheel of mortal reincarnation. Those who refused lived out their normal, albeit brief, lives, often dying young as their pattern dictated. The consistency of these disparate folktales, from unconnected villages and time periods, sharing such specific details, the scar, the waiting, the invitation, the choice, was too precise to be purely coincidental. Anthropologists posited that these were not mere stories. They were cultural memories, deeply ingrained narratives reflecting a truth, however distorted, that had manifested repeatedly enough to become legend. Dr. Elena Novakova, it seemed, was not a singular anomaly. She was the latest chapter in a very, very old story. She was one of the marked, and her time to choose had finally arrived. The sheer impossibility of the Dante Sokolov case, coupled with Dr. Elena Novakova's inexplicable disappearance and the chilling historical connections, forced the scientific community to grapple with concepts that lay far outside conventional understanding. Academics, medical professionals, and researchers, often operating in clandestine online forums or under strict confidentiality agreements, began to propose various theories, each more radical than the last, in a desperate attempt to contextualize the Prague anomaly. Theory 1. Ancestral genetic memory. One of the initial Lassie's more conservative theories posited that Dr. Elena Novakova was a direct descendant of the Elena of 1634 and all the subsequent Elenas. Proponents of this theory suggested that extreme trauma, profound experiences, or even strong emotional imprints could, in rare cases, be recorded at a genetic or epigenetic level. This ancestral genetic memory could then be transmitted down the lineage, causing Dr. Elena to experience vivid, inherited memories of her ancestors' lives. The crescent scar could be explained as a recurring birthmark, a somatic echo passed down through generations. However, this theory quickly faltered. It failed to account for the continuous, unbroken timeline of 700 years, an impossible feat for a single family line to maintain without extensive interbreeding or migration patterns, neither of which were indicated. Crucially, it offered no explanation whatsoever for Dante Sokolov's 400-year-old blood, his immortal cells, or his impossible vital signs. Ancestral memory, while a fascinating concept, could not bridge the chasm of biological defiance presented by the patient himself. Theory 2. Biological immortality through viral symbiosis. A far more radical and unsettling theory emerged from an anonymous virologist on a closed research forum, hinting at ancient pathogens. This theory proposed the existence of an unknown, highly advanced pathogen, perhaps a virus, a prion, or even a symbiotic microorganism, capable of fundamentally rewriting the human cellular code. Instead of causing disease, this entity would induce a state of biological immortality by preventing cellular senescence, aging, and apoptosis, programmed death. The theory suggested that Dante Sokolov was a carrier, perhaps even the primary host of this pathogen. His black blood, its unique morphology, its resistance to destruction, and its ancient carbon-14 signature were all manifestations of this symbiotic relationship. When Dr. Elena Novakova encountered him, she was not merely exposed to an infection, but offered a fundamental biological transformation. This awakening was not an illness, but a complete cellular restructuring, a re-engineering of her physiology to integrate the pathogen and achieve a similar state of timeless existence. Her blood composition would change, her body temperature would adapt, her metabolic rate would alter, and her sensory perceptions would be profoundly enhanced. Historical patterns of devastating plagues were cited as potential evidence. Some medieval chronicles mention individuals who, amidst widespread death, seemed untouched by death's hand, surviving outbreaks without succumbing. Could these have been early carriers, or even transformed individuals, whose new biological state rendered them immune to conventional diseases? This theory, while terrifying in its implications for human identity, offered a plausible, though still unproven, biological mechanism for the impossible phenomena observed. Theory 3. Temporal fragmentation. From the esoteric fringes of theoretical physics, particularly from Eastern European universities, came the concept of localized temporal fragmentation. This radical idea suggested that certain individuals, through a unique quantum configuration, might exist anchored across multiple timelines simultaneously. Their consciousness, rather than being confined to a single linear existence, could be in a state of quantum superposition, experiencing echoes or fragments of parallel lives across centuries. In moments of profound crisis, intense emotional resonance, or catalytic encounter, these timelines could temporarily converge. This convergence would allow the individual to access and integrate memories from their other existences. The recurring crescent scar on Dr. Elena's wrist was explained as a physical anchor, a somatic marker that persisted across these converging timelines. Dante Sokolov, in this scenario, was not a carrier of a pathogen, but a temporal catalyst, an individual existing outside conventional linear time capable of initiating such convergences. His role would be to trigger the full awakening of these temporally fragmented individuals, allowing them to remember all versions of themselves across time and make a conscious choice about which reality or which form of existence they wish to inhabit. This offered an explanation for the profound sense of remembering experienced by Dr. Novakova. Theory 4. The chosen lineage, anthropological folklore perspective. Finally, an anthropologist specializing in European folklore offered a perspective that integrated ancient myths with the modern mystery. This theory built upon the established presence of the marked ones in Slavic and Eastern European oral traditions. These legends, found in Czech, Romanian, Serbian, Hungarian, and Polish cultures shared strikingly similar elements. The immortal beings, strigoi, moroi, upir, were depicted not as random predators, but as highly selective entities. They did not simply choose, they observed, sometimes for centuries, tracking specific souls through their cycles of rebirth. The soul's repeated return to Prague, its consistent dedication to healing, and its recurring tragic end were seen as a deliberate test, a process of selection. The invitation was only extended when the soul had proven its resilience, compassion, and readiness to comprehend a greater reality. The number 7, often appearing in folklore as a number of completion or transformation, aligned perfectly with the 7 previous lives of Elena Novakova. This theory proposed that the impossible blood, the immortal cells, and the profound memories were not purely scientific anomalies, but the physical manifestation of an ancient covenant, a biological consequence of accepting this centuries-old invitation. The anthropologist concluded that these are not just stories. They are cultural memory of something real that happened repeatedly enough to become legend. This perspective provided a compelling narrative and purpose behind the inexplicable, something the purely scientific theories struggled to offer. Each theory, in its own way, tried to force the square peg of Dante Sokolov and Elena Novakova into the round hole of human understanding. But the deeper implications suggested that perhaps the whole itself, the very framework of human reality, needed to be re-examined. In the weeks and months following the disappearance of Dr. Elena Novakova and the enigmatic patient, an unsettling pattern of coordinated suppression began to emerge. The digital fragments of the case, initially shared in hushed tones across encrypted medical forums and private research groups, started to vanish with chilling efficiency. It was not a random server crash or an isolated deletion. It was a systematic, surgical removal. Medical forums where the case had been hotly debated were abruptly taken offline, their content permanently deleted. Social media posts, even those on private profiles, were scrubbed clean. Archived threads on decentralized platforms, designed to resist censorship, inexplicably corrupted or vanished. Users who attempted to repost information or even discuss the case in vague terms received automated warnings. This content violates our medical misinformation guidelines. The term, typically reserved for dangerous health falsehoods, was now being wielded to silence inconvenient truths. A determined Czech investigative journalist, deeply suspicious of the official narrative, attempted to publish an article on the disappearing doctor and the impossible blood. His piece, meticulously researched and carefully worded, was rejected by 5 different national and international news outlets, all citing the same vague justification: cannot verify sources. When he attempted to publish it independently on his personal blog, his entire website was inexplicably taken down within hours, cited for copyright violation. Copyright of what outsider no one could explain. The message was clear. This story was not to be told. Most disturbing of all was the fate of the witnesses. The nurse who had found Dr. Novakova's diary, after signing a draconian confidentiality agreement, was suddenly transferred to a remote, understaffed rural hospital, effectively isolated from any reliable internet access or external communication. The laboratory technician, overwhelmed by the impossible findings, abruptly resigned from her position and reportedly moved to a different country, severing all contact. The consulting geneticist, whose leaked email had hinted at the profound implications, found all his digital communications about the case purged, his institutional email returning, user not found as messages. It was as if every person touched by the Prague anomaly was systematically being erased, silenced, or relocated. 3 weeks after the incident, the Ministry of Health of the Czech Republic issued a terse, dismissive statement. It addressed rumors circulating about an alleged anomalous case at Prague University Hospital, flatly stating that, after a complete investigation, we confirm no event outside standard medical protocol occurred. Dr. Novakova, the statement claimed, had simply requested resignation for personal reasons and is currently on sabbatical in a private location. The ministry concluded by reinforcing its commitment to scientific accuracy and repudiating sensationalist speculation. The case was officially closed. The narrative was controlled, but some truths, once glimpsed, refused to be entirely extinguished. Anonymous messages, encrypted and carefully circulated, began to arrive in closed groups of healthcare professionals across Eastern Europe. All contained similar reports. "I saw a similar case in Budapest," one wrote. "Patient with dark blood in Bucharest 2 months ago," another claimed. "Cells that don't die, impossible temperature. Vienna, last year," a third whispered. The pattern was repeating. Not just in Prague, but throughout the ancient, shadowed lands of Eastern Europe. Prague, Budapest, Bucharest, Krakow, Belgrade. Always in major urban hospitals. Always involving patients with unexplainable anomalies. And always, without fail, followed by the disappearance or silencing of the healthcare professionals involved. This systematic nature of the suppression, the synchronized deletion across multiple countries, the efficient silencing of witnesses, strongly suggested a level of coordination far beyond a single national government. Some researchers began to theorize the existence of an international task force, a covert organization dedicated to identifying, containing, and ultimately erasing what they termed anomalous biological events. Such an entity, operating with vast resources and influence, would function like a global medical black ops unit, ensuring that any challenge to humanity's accepted biological reality remained hidden. How else to explain the synchronized scrub of digital records across multiple nations? How else to explain witnesses in different countries all experiencing similar pressures and relocations? The efficiency, the thoroughness, and the chilling consistency of the cover-up suggested not a singular, reactive effort, but a long-standing, well-resourced operation. It implied that this was not the first time such an event had occurred, nor the first time it had been meticulously buried. How many other awakenings? How many other impossible patients? How many other undeniable truths had been erased from public record throughout history, simply because they defied the known, the comfortable, and the controlled? The official silence was not an absence of evidence, but a carefully constructed barrier, designed to preserve a version of reality that suited those in power. So, what truly transpired at the University Hospital Prague? Was it an elaborate abduction? A top-secret experiment gone awry? Or a collective delusion brought on by stress and fear? Or was it, as the deepest corners of folklore and theoretical physics suggest, something that our modern science simply lacks the vocabulary to describe? A phenomenon that lies beyond the very edge of our accepted reality. A phrase, ancient and profound, began to appear repeatedly in discussions surrounding the case. It was found in anonymous emails, etched in Latin onto forgotten scraps of paper, and even, some claim, spray-painted onto walls near the hospital, only to be quickly removed. Mors non est finis, est janua. Death is not the end. It is a doorway. Perhaps the true mystery of the impossible blood patient is not merely whether the case is real, but why it fascinates us so deeply. Why do millions worldwide, upon hearing about black blood, immortal cells, and centuries-spanning connections, feel a shiver of recognition, a resonance within their own being? Could there be, deep within our collective psyche, an ancient memory? A primal understanding that death is not absolute, that there are exceptions, that there are choices to be made. Philosophers and psychologists have long spoken of the archetype of the immortal, a universal concept deeply embedded in human consciousness. It is the persistent idea, found in every culture, that some among us are not truly bound by the fragile constraints of mortality. Perhaps the Prague case touched this very archetype, activating a dormant understanding, not because it definitively proved that immortals walk among us, but because it reminded us of something we have always known, yet have been conditioned to forget, that the boundaries between life and death, between the human and something more, were never as solid, as impenetrable as we were taught. Today, 6 months after the incident, the University Hospital Prague operates with a facade of normalcy. No plaques, no memorials commemorate the impossible event. The room where Dante Sokolov was first examined remains in use, indistinguishable from any other. Yet, among the night staff, whispers persist. Something lingers. Sometimes, they say, on Thursday early mornings, around 2:14 a.m., the exact time of the patient's arrival, the lights in that specific room inexplicably flicker. No technical reason, no electrical fault. And occasionally, night shift professionals report a faint, almost imperceptible scent, a strange mix of vinegar and dried roses, the very same aromas described in the 1634 Monk's Chronicles, clinging to the memory of the healer who carried the moon's mark. Dr. Elena Novakova was never officially found. No travel records, no financial transactions, no body. All traces vanished. But some say that on full moon nights, in the ancient labyrinthine alleys of Prague, if one listens closely, they might hear light, ethereal footsteps, and sometimes a soft, free, and ancient laughter. The laughter of someone profoundly liberated. The case of the impossible blood patient remains without official explanation. A classified secret, a forgotten truth. But perhaps the real answer is not to be found in files, or in scientific papers, or in government reports. Perhaps the real answer is in the mirror. Because if you have a scar whose origin you've never truly understood, if you dream of places you've never visited, yet feel a profound familiarity, if you feel, sometimes, that you've lived all this before, that there is a deeper memory within you, then perhaps you, too, are one of the marked. And perhaps, on some future early morning, when the world is quiet and the veil between realities thins, someone with black blood and ancient, knowing eyes will come to remind you of who you really are. This is not just a story about vampires or mythical creatures. This is a story about choice, about a memory that transcends time, about a love that waits for centuries. It is about the profound possibility that we are more than these brief, mortal lives, that consciousness, once truly awakened to its true nature, cannot be contained by the simple act of dying. The patient with the impossible blood asked one question that echoes beyond this specific case, a question meant for each of us. When your time comes, when someone offers you the choice, will you remember who you've always been? Or will you forget again? The answer, perhaps, may determine whether you die, or finally, truly, awaken.